Hi, welcome everyone to this Frantic and Contentful webinar. This is titled Addressing Business Needs with an Agile Stack. And great to see that so many of you could join us with this webinar. And firstly, I would just like to introduce our host today. My name is Akseli Virtanen, and I'm a senior consultant at Frantic. Peter, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Peter, and I'm working as a product consultant at Contentful. I would give a closer introduction when I actually give the presentation.
And then we also have Lisa, a moderator in the chat room. And she's going to be helping out with the chat and Q&A part of this presentation. And for those who don't know who we are at Frantic, we are a Finnish digital service consultancy, and we develop our clients' digital business and customer experience through human-centered design and modern application development. I have a couple of things before we get forward with the presentation. I indeed want to tell you that we are recording this session, so that is your legal notice. We are recording this session for the benefit of you and people who could not attend. And also, we will be sharing with you, everyone who signed up, the recording of this presentation, as well as a feedback form for after we are done with this. Okay, and then for the interactive parts, we are using Slido today. So, and right now, if you look into the Google Meet chat, Lisa, a moderator, will be sharing the Slido link there, and we will be using, there you can answer our polls and also leave questions that we will then discuss with Peter in the last part of this presentation. So I hope everyone is finding the Slido link, and I hope we can get some nice interactivity going as well in here. Okay, onward then. We have a warm-up poll, so now we're going to test if everyone found the Slido. And our warm-up poll question, just to get us started, is, in your opinion, how does your organization's CMS solution match your business needs? And today we have two answers, that it matches very well, or then it could be better in some way. And this is just for us to sort of stretch our legs a bit with the Slido and with our program this afternoon. Okay, look like, well, we were there 50-50 with it could be better and matches very well, but now it seems that sometimes things could be a bit better in the organization CMS front. Okay, yes, and it's nice to see that everyone is finding the poll link and joining us in this, because this will be quite fun if we can make this into an interactive experience, and we definitely encourage everyone to participate in the polls and questions. Now, I will shortly talk about Frantic, who we are and what we do, and what does it have to do with stacks and contentful and modern application development. We at Frantic, it's a 23 years old digital business and customer experience agency. We are about 90 professionals in Finland, in Helsinki, and our basically the core of what we do is we develop digital business and customer experience through human-centered design and modern application development. And typically the way we work is either as consultants with client companies, or then also we do projects in cases where there maybe isn't a client team or like a localized department like that. And what we do, we kind of explain through this picture. So what we do consists of design, technology, agile leadership, data and analytics. And we definitely believe that all of these competencies need to come together in a team. So teamwork is something that's very near and dear to our heart. And we spend a lot of our time thinking about how to work together across different competencies, not just within single areas of these things. And here's another picture of our thinking, which is that customer experience is the focus of things. And when you have great customer experience, then your business will grow. And in another way, how to get to a customer experience, good customer experience is not through some single initiative or single department or single competency, but that things like IT, marketing, business, and sales all need to come together to kind of create this customer experience, because after all, that's what the word is. It's an experience. So you can't kind of draw it from a single department or initiative. And we build stacks. We can help you with quite a lot of things that are needed in modern application development in an enterprise or corporate context. So some examples of the things that our developers and designers do is e-commerce and front-end applications of all varieties, microservices, serverless backends, and integrations, CRM integrations, e-commerce integrations, all kinds of things that are necessary for doing business online. And then relevant to our presentation today, obviously we can also create custom apps using the brand new Contentful App Framework for targeted integrating needs and other customizations that a company might need with their Contentful platform. And continuing with the content team, we also provide expertise in content modeling and content strategy that we feel is extremely important, together with the technical side to really like make for successful projects and create results that are like impactful beyond just like building platforms and tools. And obviously for today, the relevance is that we can really like kickstart your projects, especially like contentful projects with experts that have experience in all sides of this platform, be it development, design, or analytics, any kind of approach we can really help with. And here's another way of seeing this is that with these modern enterprise platforms such as Contentful, you really need a complete package, and that is exactly why Contentful partners exist, because whereas Contentful provides you an enterprise-grade platform with dedicated support options and plans that really can tackle all kinds of different scales of business, and also the app framework that was mentioned, then we as a Contentful partner, we can build all these other pieces that you need in this modern application stack. So that would be those front ends and the serverless backends, and also providing teams and expertise in all areas of these projects. And then finally, I will just want to mention that we have an example case that quite nicely combines all of these values. So this is Compensate, the online store for emission compensation, which is quite known in Finland and worldwide. And this was created by our development team. And it features such things as payment integrations with Stripe and API integrations, and of course uses the Contentful as the content backend for delivering this overall platform to the global kind of challenge that not only is this not only Compensate is tackling, but also this is a project where it was required that we can get going from a very quickly and in a very agile way, but still be able to scale it to a global scale in a quite quick amount of days. And at this point, I want to thank. I'm going to throw it. I'm actually going to throw it over to Peter, who's going to talk about stacks versus suites and how modern application development should work today. So, Peter, if you would take over.
All right. Thank you, Akseli. And yeah, as I said, I'm Peter, and I'm working with product strategy at Contentful. I come from the north of Sweden, which means I love the true elements: snow, darkness, cold, and content management. And I've been working with content management for way too long. At least that's what my wife tells me. So it's almost 15 years. And before Contentful, I was at Episerver. But do you remember the good old days when everything was so much simpler? You knew that if you had a specific problem to solve, you could usually just categorize that problem, and then you could use a specific best practice for that type of category to get to the outcomes that you wanted. And in fact is that many of the processes that we still today uses are based on that more simple quadrant in terms of problem complexity. And also in the complicated quadrant, which is the quadrant to the top right here, which it's also it's a bit more complicated. But if you analyze the problem in that sense, you can usually find a good practice of what to use to get to the desired outcomes. And companies has been working with processes and tools that are really well suited for the simple and complicated quadrant. And this is also what the Taylor model is based on when we divide different companies into specific departments with specialists tied together. But in today's world, the digital first era, it turns out that many of the problems that we want to solve are actually much more complex than that, which means that there is no best practice, or there is not even a good practice, meaning that you will need to experiment and really see what's working and what's not working in this new world. And this has led to several changes in terms of how organizations will need to work, but also many changes in terms of how they need to think about the tools and technology that they're using to become successful in this quadrant. And if you haven't seen this framework before, I really recommend to Google the Cinefin framework. It's made by Dave Snowden at IBM Global Services. And the science around complexity is quite new. So this quadrant, I think, was made in the beginning of 2000. So there's still more research to be done. But I wanted to think more about that complex quadrant and this digital first era with much higher customer expectations and also much bigger challenges than for companies on how to become successful. And the agile mindset has been to always improve and seize opportunities and avoid danger. But is that all there is to it? And I have the good news here. He managed to escape this, I think it's a cheetah. But one thing that we've seen among the most innovative companies is they have they're working according to a different mindset. And we're calling that the builder ethos. And a builder is not just a developer, but it's a builder who wants to create things, want to learn from the things that he or she has created, and base really the next step on that. And this mindset is very important for companies to have to be able to succeed in this complex quadrant. And I want to dive into some of the main foundations for the builder ethos. And one thing is really how you're working in terms of both evaluating new tools, but also how you're working with the tools that you're having. And for companies that have been organized around these specific departments, such as marketing and the IT and the sales and customer success, etc., and they usually evaluate systems based on RFPs like this one. So different stakeholders set up the requirements that they have on a specific new system, and then collect everything into a big document with all these different requirements. And I've talked to so many people, especially in that's working with CMSs, and they usually say that there are so many requirements you put into these lists, which turn out to be things that you're hardly using in the tool that you're eventually buying. And one specific example is around workflows, where there might be in these RFPs, really detailed requirements around specific multi-step workflows, etc., which is in today's new world usually just blocking companies actually, so they can't move fast enough. So that's a specific thing which these RFPs are leading to. And the big change now is how you're starting to evaluate software at these more innovative companies. And it's, on one hand, a change in how you organize your team, so they are cross-functional, meaning that you have technical competence, you have marketing competence, and you might even have sales competence within the team that's evaluating the new system. And instead of creating a big list of requirements, you're actually building a proof of concept, or you're building a specific MVP. And that way, you can not just evaluate, the hard parts of the product, but also the soft parts, such as support. A great example is, you start using a new tool, and then you start asking questions to support while you're doing that, to see how you're able to solve your problems as you go. So one of the main advantages, I would say, with this approach is that on one hand, you can work with smaller chunks, but you also evaluate in the full scope of the service that you want to use. And this skateboard example is a classic model. So instead of putting up the requirements for a car, if you want to have a tool that takes you from A to B, you just start with building the skateboard and evaluate from there. And another big change that's happening, and if you look at content management, for those of us who's been with us, in the content management space from the beginning of 2000, you know that the content management systems has actually, become bigger and bigger and turned into more these customer experience platforms, which means they are not only containing content management, they might also contain personalization, A/B test, maybe commerce, etc. And everything is built into this all-in-one suite. And these all-in-one suites has been great for the last 10 years. But I think what we're seeing now is that they're not able to meet the requirements in terms of speed and in terms of changing direction quickly, which you will need to do in today's world. And that's why many companies are instead building these stacks that Akseli talked about, meaning that instead of buying this all-in-one suite, you're buying different services that are serving a specific need. So for example, the content management part, and if you want e-commerce, you buy an e-commerce service, and then you're connecting those two into stack. And one of the advantages with this approach is that you can update these services individually, so you're not stuck inside these big migration projects, etc. But you can also select the exact tools that you need. And there's this saying that you should select the right tool for the right type of problem, instead of selecting a tool that are trying to solve all your different problems. Because when you do that, you're usually buying this big tool, which is actually quite bad at all the problems that you are trying to solve. And this trend is something that not only we see in the market, but also Gartner. So they've made this survey among marketers. And you can see a big change in this year's result in terms of the marketers that prefer a best-of-breed approach compared to this integrated suite approach. And I'm not a big fan of the word best-of-breed, because I think that sounds like you should always, pick the best systems, the most expensive, maybe, the market-leading systems. But I think it should really say best for your business type of approach. You just select the tool that's best for your business and that the teams inside your business want to use. And we also see this on the technology side of the house. And I think this is really interesting because with the rise of these different services, and especially the headless systems, it means that you will need to build the front end yourself. But this is something where companies really can differentiate. So instead of focusing on the back end, companies can now focus on building the experience and have these specific services take care of the back end. And that's why in this Forrester survey, you can really see that companies now prefer ease of integration among front-end components rather than trying to get all components from a single vendor. And there is a saying that it takes 800 microservices to get a taxi to your door, because that's the number of microservices that Uber uses. And I'm not sure if that is true, but Uber has been one of the companies that has really focused hard on microservices to be able to move fast in this new world. So you can see that they're using many specialized services, and on top of that, they're building their digital stack, which is then becoming the big differentiator for them. If you compare that with the all-in-one suite to the left, which is more focused on customization, and when you're focusing on that customization, it usually means that you get stuck in a specific version of the platform that you have built your customization on top of. And I'm still surprised, actually, that there are so many CMS users out there which kind of accept that their CMS version is not updated automatically in the same way that their Gmail client is updated, or pretty much any other software that we are using. So I think this will be a big change in the market now, where more and more of these services that are updated automatically is slowly taking overhand. And another very important aspect to be able to move fast is to be able to try out new things that you are developing. And developers usually refer to their sandbox environment, so where they're trying out new things. But the key is that you want to be able to go from that sandbox environment really quickly out to production to see what works and what doesn't work. So you should be able to really run these safe-to-fail experiments and learn from those, and then decide your next steps based on these results. So it's very important for these systems to be able to do exactly that. Let your team try out new features, functionality, new content fast. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, learn from that and create a new iteration quickly thereafter. So to give you some examples, that at Facebook, code changes can go from a development machine to production in just 40 minutes. And Amazon deploys to production around 137,000 times per day. So that's, of course, staggering numbers. If you look at the Contentful customers, we have customers who are deploying 11 times per day to production, which is also a really great result. So what type of requirements can we put on the platform? First and foremost, we need to have power. We have that now. We really believe in a builder-centric, API-driven platform. And the reason for that is really the things I talked about, that how do we enable the teams to work fast? How do we enable the stacks? And how do we be able to quickly iterate on the features that we are creating? And Contentful platform is really based upon 3 different pillars. So on one hand, it's modular. On one hand, we're connecting different services. And on one hand, we're empowering teams. And I will walk through each 3 of these so you understand how Contentful can help your company. So if we start with the modular platform. So first and foremost, Contentful is really good at managing content. And we divide that content into content repositories. So see those as small content projects that one or several teams are working with. So when you sign into Contentful, you will actually see, the projects that you are part of, the teams that are working on those projects. And if you're an administrator, you will, of course, see your whole organization and all the projects that are currently ongoing and which teams are working on those. Those different content repositories can then be connected with other services using our content management API. So the content management API really lets you connect, for example, to your favorite e-commerce system or to your PIM provider to let you connect the content that you created with a specific product or a specific product category. It can also then connect your content with personalization, etc. The content management API and the API framework, or the app framework we built on top of that, is one of the key components to enable this stack. And then, very importantly, you of course want to build experiences on top of your content. And that's where we have the delivery APIs to the right here. And on top of these delivery APIs, that's where you're building your experiences. And one advantage, of course, with headless systems is that you can select any technology you want when you're building those experiences. And you can also reuse content across your different content repositories to different parts of the customer journey. This is usually referred to being a content hub. So one of the very strong parts of Contentful is to be serving as that content hub for pretty much all your different experiences along the customer journey. And then the connected services part. So we have the modular platform, which is API-based. On top of this, we have built an app framework. And I usually give the example of comparing how mobile phones work with apps before the iPhone was released or Android was released. So if you then wanted to have an app on your phone, you could download it maybe with a USB stick. You could transfer it using Bluetooth via your computer, or you could wire your phone with your computer and download it that way. But there was no central way of managing these apps, so they didn't get updated automatically, etc. So it was quite a hassle. And then Apple released iPhone and the iPhone platform, and all of a sudden we could automatically install apps such as Google Maps, the social apps, etc. And now we just take for granted that those apps are being updated continuously, and everything is just working. The same thinking has gone into the app framework that Contentful has created. So if you want to build that stack, for example, having personalization, having e-commerce, etc., that's something that the administrator can install as an app. And that app will then be updated automatically. You can also decide to have that app across these different repositories that we talked about earlier. But it's really giving that central management of apps and also decoupling these different services so they can be updated independently. And then the last pillar, empowering teams. And I think it's very important to think about content will be a core part of the different experiences that you're building. That's why it's so important to give this overview to the team so they can see which projects you're working on, which teams that are owners of specific content repositories, and then how these content repositories are powering different experiences. And when you have built a core stack, you can then enable specific components for different teams. So if you have Contentful as the foundation for content, and then you may be using commerce tools for e-commerce and optimizely for A/B testing, it's really easy to launch a new experience using exactly those modules in your stack. So this is really key if you want to start, on one hand, scale your different experience across the whole customer journey, but also when you want to update different experiences that the teams are owning. And another key functionality that we have in Contentful is really to enable these fast iterative updates. So one thing we see is that developers are usually really good at building up what they call continuous integration and continuous delivery, meaning that they can make updates to their code, they can try it out in a QA environment, and if it works, they're rolling that out to production. So that usually goes really fast. The problem is it hasn't existed the same thing for content and content modeling changes before, meaning that if you, for example, want to make changes to your checkout flow on your e-commerce site, that involves, on one hand, code changes, but also content changes and content model changes. So how can you do that really quickly? And this is a concept that Contentful has called space environments, which really lets you create these branches where you're making changes to the content model, to the content, and to the code, lets you quickly test that, and if it works, you can turn that into master. So this is really how we're enabling our customers to be able to do these 11 deployments per day type of scenarios. So if you connect all these different pieces in the stack, the enablement of the teams, and getting the overview of your different projects, what we see is that the content platform is really becoming that connective tissue for the different services that you're using. And this is dependent on the fact that content is a core component across all the things that you are creating for your customers. And this is also highlighted by Gartner in one of their reports around digital experience management, highlighting that content platform will become the connective tissue for your digital stack. And I wanted to end with one example, which is Bang & Olufsen. So Bang & Olufsen felt that they weren't moving fast enough. They weren't able to build new experiences that they wanted, and they weren't able to meet the customers where they were at. They had invested in one of these traditional systems, which comes with CMS and commerce, but they felt that solution was holding them down they weren't able to connect the physical stores with the digital experiences. So they decided to try the stack approach instead, using Contentful for content and Commerce Tool as their e-commerce engine. And the result they get were staggering. So now they're able to move much faster and respond to market changes. And they really have the flexibility, meaning that once again, in that complex quadrant, they don't know what they might need to do tomorrow. But the flexibility in that stack really makes it easy for them to build the things that they need. And they're now able to connect all their physical stores with their online store. And they have turned what used to be 2 websites into 1 using the Content Hub example that I gave earlier. And the results are really good. So you can see that on one hand, it's related to the performance of the site, how fast it's load, improving the experience for customers that way. But it's also the improvements in conversion rates for them to being able really to meet the needs that their customers were having. And with those results, I want to hand back to Akseli, and we can move over to the Q&A section. Thank you.
And here we go with the audience Q&A. So we have a couple of polls set up first for some warming up again. So let's just go to the first one. So we wanted to ask everyone, has COVID-19 put pressure on your business to deliver solutions more quickly? Yes or no? We have a couple of yeses, some more yes. I wonder if anyone has had the opposite experience. But I guess we can Peter talk a little bit about like okay, so we do have some no's also. I guess we can talk about little bit about like what kind of happened with COVID-19 and why speed is important.
Yeah, and I actually just talked with a company in Sweden last week where they told me about one of their initiatives, which they were already working on, which was a click and collect. So really a way to pick up or go to their website and decide what to buy, and then you can go and pick it up in the store just a couple of hours later. So this was a feature that they were planning actually for next year. And then COVID-19 hit, and they had really no option then to turn pretty much all resources to finish this project now in only 2 months. And they managed to do that because they had the flexibility in the stack. And one thing that the development lead highlighted for me was that thing that it was so good that they bought into flexibility rather than buying into specific features. Because if they'd been buying into specific features, they wouldn't have been able to build this whole new experience, which they didn't plan this year. So I think that's one example, and COVID-19 has really changed, I think, even more so towards thinking about how can we be more flexible. And when evaluating systems, thinking more about what can we build on top of these systems rather than looking at do they meet the specific requirements and do they have the features that we need today.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a very good point about how the speed is really in how you can respond to change and build new things and create new kind of experiences rather than like looking at what features might you have, because I think there would have been no sort of feature that could answer to this COVID-19 type of situation like out of hand. Okay, so our ending result is that we got 67% yeses and also some no's here, but definitely some pressure was felt to be more quick in delivering solutions. Okay, up to our next poll, which is the question is, in your opinion, does your organization rely more on stacks or suites? And just to sort of reiterate, I guess, the difference between these is that for today, as we're speaking about stacks and suites, by stack we mean this sort of modular architecture where you have lots of different pieces of technology kind of integrated together with standard APIs and so on. And then Suite is more of this all-in-one tool. How do you feel about this, Peter?
Yeah, and interesting to see the result here. So 50-50. I think this is a change that is ongoing, and more and more companies are now betting on stacks. And I think it's important also to highlight that when you decide to take more of a stack approach, that doesn't mean that it's throwing everything that you're currently having out the door, right? So one of the approaches one of the advantages with stack is you can actually start really small on the side with that and reuse the technology investment that you're already having, right? And then slowly start to transition more and more towards this modular stack to become more flexible. But I definitely don't think it's not that classic, rip and replace. That's not how you're buying stacks. It's usually coming a little bit from the bottom that the teams want to use it, and then it's expanding across the whole organization.
Yeah, I think you're very right about that. For me, one of the hallmarks of a stack approach is that it starts from some smaller use case, and then you might even be surprised by like how the technology or some service gets adopted. So I kind of myself associate stacks with this sort of organic growth, with like discovering what things are useful and what things need sort of building.
Yeah, and I think it's also very similar if you look at now when people are working from home, right, all of a sudden they want to start using maybe collaboration tools which let you do online workshops, etc. And then some organizations are stuck in, no, we're not allowed to use these tools. We already bought this specific tools which we're standardized on. And I think this is a typical example where you've done the standardization and not so much maybe listening to the requirements that are needed for your specific teams that are working, right?
Okay, and it seems that we're sort of got this. Stacks have a slight edge, but it's an almost a 50-50 situation with 13 responses. Now, I think we have some questions that we've gotten from the audience either beforehand or just now, and let's just go to these, and I'll pick one of these. Now, I think this one is a very good question. So, isn't it more expensive to maintain all these different technologies compared to a single suite? How do you feel about this one, Peter?
So I think on one hand, the advantage with many of the new cloud services, such as Contentful, is that you're actually buying them very different compared to a classic all-in-one suite, right? You're usually paying more for what you need right now. And then if you start using it more, then you're also paying more. So it's one of these things where I think you can really see the transparency in terms of the value you're getting out of these services and what you're paying for. And I think one thing with these all-in-one suites is that you're usually paying for lots of functionality that you will never use, right? Then I think in terms of complexity of having a stack versus an all-in-one suite, so one of the advantages with the suite is usually, it's very tightly coupled, right? So the parts that you have in there, they're working really well together and doesn't need that much maintenance, given that you just want to use it that way. But the challenge we're having today is that you usually want to do the things which that all-in-one suite is not really made for. And that's where you need to start, breaking some things apart, build stuff around that framework, etc. And that's where it's get complicated and potentially then more expensive to maintain. So I really see this as, there are smaller parts that you have in the stacks. And yes, you will need to think about and maybe have different roles for really that digital stack and holding that together, so to speak. That's what I refer to as the blueprint in my example. So that will be an important competence to have when you're building the digital stack, that who's owning that digital stack. We see the role of platform owners starting to appear in these companies, but that role is definitely needed.
Yeah, and I would just sort of quickly add that even though the suite comes with a single price, it rarely comes with all their expertise and know how to do all those different things. So even if you buy the all-in-one tool, it still usually requires like some sort of developer competencies and designers and various other roles. So it's because it's never going to be just like one type of activities that are going to be done around the business. So that's how I would end there. I think next one we could take this one. What happens to my data in a software as a service solution?
So on one hand, when talking about data, I think it's always important to understand the different types of data that you're having as a company, right? And it might be that you're categorizing that in different way. It might be the red data, which is really personal information that you have among your customers. Then you might have, yellow, which is somewhat sensitive, but maybe not super sensitive. And then you have green type of data or green content, which doesn't have the same type of security aspects are needed around it. But when evaluating a SaaS solution, I think it's very important to look at those specific things, because you will be storing your content in the cloud. And then it's important that you have the right governance tools as well as the security aspects around the data, given the classification of it, right? So this will be an important part when you're evaluating the systems. And then I think another aspect, which is many of the cloud systems are really good at making sure that your data is open, in the sense it's really on one hand easy to put it in, but you can also get it back out if you want for some reason, change systems, etc. So this is also something to think about to make sure that is in place. But it is for many of the services that we are talking about today. So so I think that's the things I should think about when having my data in the cloud.
Yeah, and I would add just like this kind of I would say metaphor that I think sometimes organizations feel that it's more secure and it's more control if they have all the data in their like on-premise or cloud accounts and systems. But then if we think about, for example, banking, then banking is an example where you pay as a service for people who are much better at securing certain things and sort of organizing, for example, your financials than you would ever be. So I think in a lot of cases it actually makes sense to pay for the governance and security as a service. Like it makes more sense than trying to do it yourself in a way.
Yeah.
Yes, and then we'll take this one. Can you share the video and slides? And as I said in the beginning, the recording of this will be sent to all the participants, and we will also be sharing this in Frantic and Contentful channels later. So yes. I guess we already talked a lot about why you should adopt the stack approach versus a more traditional all-in-one approach, but I guess we could just sort of quickly summarize like the main points of this discussion, if you would, Peter.
Yeah, so I think on one hand it has to do with faster time to value. I think that's one thing which I think is very important. How fast can you get to value? And I think with the flexibility and the possibility to really start small and scale out, the stack approach is much more effective at that. And then I think that the part that is connected to that is if you look at the conversion, or actually one of the benefits in terms of performance and conversions, etc., we see that the stack approach is something called the jam stack, which is now superior when it comes to speed and performance of your site. And this really means that developers, when they can divide it into modules, they can really create faster sites. They can use a technique called static site generators, which is really the best standard today in terms of performance. So it also gives that in building customer experience, I think, has a lot to do with performance, and many people maybe don't realize that, but that is a so important part actually. So I think that's if you can really get to value faster and you can build these experiences which are much faster, you have come a really long way in terms of your first initial project.
Yeah. So it really comes back to having that speed for change that we see is so necessary for doing business today. Okay, we'll take that one, and then actually I want to take this one specific question about Contentful. How do you handle localization, language versions, and translation process with Contentful? Do you want to talk in general about this, Peter?
Yeah, I think that's, if you look at content management, I would say that Contentful has a very similar approach to many other content management systems out there when it comes to how you work with language versions and translation processes. And so on one hand, one thing you always need to consider when you're working with localizations is that how similar will my content be for this specific new language or this specific new market. So in Contentful, you can then say that, okay, for this specific content and these different content types, I just want to have that in different versions. And then it will just, create layers, which lets you insert the translated version for that content, right? And then if you want to have completely different content for different market, then you usually have a separate content repository where you might be sharing some specific content types between, but you don't have them exactly identical. And then in terms of integration with the other translation tools, we have the marketplace, which is then built on top of the app framework that I talked about earlier, which lets you select which translation provider you want if you find your preferred one in the marketplace, or you can build an integration to if that doesn't exist.
Yeah, and I think you really highlighted an excellent kind of more in-depth aspect of localization and language versions, which is that are we talking translations and this is usually a quite complex question that ends up somewhere in between, that is this just translating the content, or usually it ends up being that it's translating plus you have this slight content and market differences with localization. So I think it rarely is a case of simply translating like one for one. And I myself know and have experience in how Contentful kind of supports both of those approaches. So you can do one-to-one translations, but you also have smart ways of setting up this kind of same but different kind of workflows. Yeah, so that one. I guess we could talk a little bit about still front ends and isn't building a custom front end risky and/or expensive?
Yeah, I think there are several aspects to this, and this is also a very common question, right? So I think if you get templates included in your CMS, I think the most important thing you should make sure is that those templates need to be decoupled from your CMS. There are too many CMSs out there today which are coupling their templates with the CMS code. And this means that whenever you're making changes to templates, it's really hard to upgrade the CMS version. So this is the reason why so many are stuck in CMS version 5.6, even though there is version 10.9 out there, right? So the templates should never come coupled with your CMS. If they do that, you will be stuck in old CMS versions. So I think that's the first thing. Then the other thing is you will need, if you look at all the projects, you will always need to make changes to the templates, right? There's very few cases I've heard of where you just take the standard templates that are included in CMS and that's what you have for your website. So the templates will be your customer experience. So that's how you differentiate. So there will always be lots of work around templates. And then the advantage you have when you have the headless solution is that you get to select what technology that you want to use when you're building your templates, which means that you can take JavaScript if that's the knowledge you have in-house. And you can have different, for example, you might start with using .NET, and then you realize, okay, now JavaScript is much better suited for these different projects that we have. Then you can use JavaScript for those projects instead. So So this is, one of the questions where I feel that there's so many advantages with the headless solution. Then it's coming back as well. Then you need to build your head yourself. Yeah, but you always need to build the head yourself. That is the end experience, and that is what you should be focusing on. That's how you can differentiate.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's basically my answer to also this is that you always need to build a custom front end, whether it is in your sort of all-in-one solution or anything else. Like when the business case kind of reach a certain complexity, then building out your own thing becomes necessary simply for you to have that competitive edge on the marketplace, and that is really where this discussion always leads. And even though sometimes it's attractive to us, of course, that we could get something for free, but I think building a custom front end is one of those things that's really inevitable in digital projects, at least when you reach a certain maturity or scale in the solution. We have about 7 minutes remaining of our allotted time, so we'll take a couple of more questions. I wanted to just quickly answer this one. Is it possible to run A/B or multivariant testing with Contentful? And I can spoil this and say the answer is yes, but if Peter, you could just quickly talk about this as well.
Yeah, and I think that's once again coming back to the stack. So this is not functionality that's built into the core Contentful because we're focusing on content. But then you can use, for example, our app for Optimizely, which then lets you run A/B or multivariant testing. So then you get to salute one of the market leading systems being Optimizely, or you can integrate with your preferred tool.
Yeah, and I think this highlights a great point about this stack approach, that yes, this Optimizely app exists for Contentful, but with the app framework and this approach, this actually doesn't have to have anything to do with Contentful's business or anything else. Like someone could, or if there's a new market leader in A/B testing tomorrow, then someone can just build the integration for that as a Contentful app, and then it exists. And this doesn't have that sort of like the slowness of this feature level process. Like I'm sure you at Contentful get a lot of feature requests, and then you could only ever do so much with the resources you have. But with the app framework, kind of a stack solution, then you can have the best of the both worlds, where like Contentful is really focused on solving the problem that it's solving, which is content and not A/B testing. But then A/B testing can be brought in from like the market leading platforms. Yeah, so that one, I think we'll have to go, next one will have to be our last question. So I'm just gonna highlight this one. How does personalization work with Contentful? And I guess we're gonna end up in a kind of same kind of place as with the previous question, but if you, Peter, take a little shot at this.
Yes, so and it's the same answer. So that's integration with, for example, Optimizely also does personalization, where many customers have been using Adobe Audience Manager as well. I think the key thing when thinking about personalization is really the taxonomy of your content, because personalization is mostly a content challenge, right? You will need to create the different content versions. You will need to tag those content versions, then for the personalization engine to be able to serve the right type of content. So the personalization in Contentful, which we have an example app around, is then on one hand making sure you can tag the content according to different tags that you're having, and then you connect that to your personalization engine, which will then connect those tags with specific customer segments, and that way being able to to serve the right type of content. And that's working really similar to an A/B test, actually, because then you also tag in different versions of your content, and then the A/B testing engine will decide which content to show to a specific customer segment.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And with that, we have to move on from these great audience questions to our closing remarks. As for myself, I will say that it has been a pleasure being with you this afternoon and with you, Peter. And I had an excellent time discussing all these questions and talking a little bit about modern application development with a stack approach. We'll be answering the rest of these questions, any that were left unanswered, or if you didn't ask them now, we'll be later discussing these in a blog post on the Frantic blog. Do you want to say something to end with, Peter?
No, thanks for having me. It was yeah, I agree. It was a great, especially the questions in the end were yeah, great to answer and chat around.
Okay, so with that, thank you everyone for joining this webinar, and this has been Frantic and Contentful on addressing business needs with an agile stack approach. So have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.